Really quick. Sorry, one more time. Historically, there has been countless attitudes about sex, and we're going to talk about 3 different attitudes. Of course, these are not all the attitudes, but just the popular ones. Number 1, there is the first attitude is there is sex as a natural appetite. Okay, so it goes something like this. Sex, it was said, was once surrounded by taboos, restrictions. But now we realize that sex is indeed like eating or like any other good and natural appetite. It's just one of the appetite. You feel hunger, you feel thirst, and you feel sexual pleasure or desire or pleasure as well. So just a natural thing. That means we should feel free to fulfill the appetite when we feel the need. Like when you're hungry, eat. When you have sexual desires, then go have sex. And there is no reason why we shouldn't sample a variety of cuisine. Just like food, you don't want to eat the same thing every day. So same thing with sex. Okay. And continually look for new taste sensations. Right? You go to, you look out on Yelp. Same thing, right? You go to good places, things like that. 5-star. Forbidding the satisfaction of a natural appetite or limiting it for years is as unhealthy as trying to stop eating for years. Okay, so the idea is sex itself, it's a natural thing. So it's actually unhealthy if you continue to restrict yourself, limit yourself, these kind of ideas. Okay, so some of you guys are like, okay? So I want you guys to kind of talk about this. Do you think you have this kind of attitude? I mean, I don't think anyone's gonna say, yes, I have this attitude in here, but talk about this. What do you think? If you disagree with this, okay, why do you disagree? Okay, go for it.
just appetite? Yes.
Oh, we don't get to hear from other groups.
Let's keep going.
You guys can talk after.
Is sex just an appetite? Yes, it is an appetite, but it is not in the same category as our needs for food and sleep. Indeed, even those desires cannot simply be gratified, whatever their level of intensity. Most people struggle to discipline their eating because their appetite for food is seriously out of line with what their bodies really need.
Okay, so number one. Okay, so we are saying yes, sex is an appetite, but it's not just merely an appetite. Okay, does that make sense? So if it is an appetite, then we have to be very careful. Just because you want food all the time, doesn't mean you could just have food all the time, right? Because if you eat food all the time, then you get really, really obese, and it's very unhealthy for you. Does that make sense? Or if you just want to sleep all the time, then you're gonna probably not have a job.
Yeah.
Okay, does that make sense? And also, by the way, just because you gratify your own desire, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. Okay, like if you eat a little too much, buffets, right? Or if you sleep a little too much, then you actually become more tired. So that's something you have to be very careful of as well. Okay, and also another thing is we measure, if you think about it, we measure, and this is from C.S. Lewis, by the way, we measure maturity not by gratifying our desires, but in the amount of which we could actually resist our desires. Does that make sense? Like a kid, we say they're immature because they just want whatever they want at whatever time they want it. Does that make sense? And we call people like that immature. Does that make sense? But if people are actually able to say no still, even though they desire it, then we go, wow, that's a very mature person. Does that make sense? All right, so that's part one, but let's go a little bit more into it. Joey?
The sex drive, however, needs even more guidance. Sex affects our heart, our inward being, not just our body. Sin, which is first and foremost a disorder of the heart, therefore has a big impact on sex. Our passions and desires for sex now are very disordered.
And this is going to be the big part, and this is going to be the biblical reason why sex is so, it has so many, I forgot where I got the phrase, it has so many bodyguards around it. Okay? And why Christianity is so like, wait until you get married. Okay? Like they're so like restrictive about it. It's because it says it right here, sex affects our heart. So if our heart, emotionally, spiritually, we're not affected by sex, then what this is saying, it could be correct, right? Have sex with whoever you want, right? It's just a physical thing, right? But the problem is when we have sex, it affects our heart, our emotions as well. So I overheard Stephanie, and this is from another book too, but Stephanie talked about why does it, okay, for example, if someone gets just domestically, or just if somebody just gets abused like physically, like let's say a kid gets like physically abused, but if someone is sexually abused, why is it that the kids who gets beat up by like bullies or something, they actually go tell their parents or tell their teachers more likely than a kid who gets sexually abused? Why? Because there's shame involved in it. Right? So that means, like, okay, another example of this could be if I told my wife I danced with a girl and I had sex with a girl, okay, they're both physical activity, aren't they? Right? But they're not just, does that make sense? So the argument is they're both physical activity, but why is it that one, she'll probably slap me, and the other one, she's like, oh, I'm not happy about it, but you know what I'm saying? Okay? All right, so again, we have to understand sex affects our heart. And so that's why we got to be very, very careful when it comes to sex. Okay, so again, if it was just a physical thing, then perhaps, again, do whatever you want. But again, if all of us understand that sex actually affects us emotionally and spiritually as well. Okay, so if that's the case, then we have to be very, very careful. And we can't just have sex as whoever we want then. Because not only are we affecting our own hearts, we're affecting other persons as well. All right. All right. Next one, we're going to go into second prominent view.
Another view of sex is more negative, and it has deep roots in some forms of ancient thought. Sex is seen as part of our lower physical nature, distinct from our higher rational or spiritual nature. In this view, sex is a degrading, dirty thing, a necessary evil for the propagation of the human race. This view is still very influential in the world.
Right. So things like this, things like I actually know a lot of people who feel, for example, like religion and sex, they just cannot be like reconciled. They're like contradictory. So, for example, I know some SDAs, they say we don't have sex on Sabbath because we feel like it's like a kind of a dirty thing. Okay, does that make sense? It's like a holy day, but we're kind of doing an unholy thing. Or even like, let's say you're having sex with your spouse and you talk about God, or you talk about, what if you pray before you have sex? Would that be weird? Again, then that means, oh, is it because we have this kind of like, sex is kind of a dirty thing, we shouldn't talk about it, it's a taboo, okay? Especially most of us, SDA is a conservative denomination on top of that. And so again, this might be something that we have as well. All right, how about you? Do you think you have some of this? Or do you agree with this? What do you think? Go for it.
I would say yes. No, I feel good. I just
Okie dokie.
not everyone for whatever reason.
Let's continue.
Not-
Wow, you guys are having great discussions. Love it. Nicole?
Is sex dirty and demeaning? No. Biblical Christianity may be the most body positive religion. It teaches that God made matter and physical body and saw that it was all good. Genesis 1:31. It says that, and Jesus Christ, God Himself, actually took on a human body, and that's something He's going to give all perfect resurrected.
Okay, does that make sense? So this is just going against like just some other religions, especially like the Greek Greek philosophy. They usually basically said everything physical is negative. So even now, we're actually like a lot of us, we're really affected by this on a lot of level. Like one example is, for example, most of us, we think people who do more bodily activity, physical activity, or we call it physical labor, we deem those jobs less than jobs which require more religion or mental. Does that make sense? So that's actually from Greek philosophy, right? We're getting it all from there. The idea is mind is a good thing, intellectual is a good thing, and body it's a negative thing. It dies. And anyway, so but we see here that God actually made everything physical as well, right? And we see that even after sin, we're not gonna be a bunch of like spirits floating around. It actually says we're gonna have physical body. Okay, so we see that Christianity gives us a very body positive or physical positive view on this. Continuing on, Joanna.
It says that God created sexuality and gave a woman and a man to each other in the beginning. The Bible contains a great love poetry that celebrates sexual passion and pleasure. If anyone says that sex is bad or dirty in itself, we have the entire Bible to contradict him. God not only allows sex within marriage, but strongly commands it. This is in 1 Corinthians 7, verses 3 to 5. If anything, the Bible is a very uncomfortable book for the prudish.
Yeah. So 1 Corinthians 7, you guys could actually look this up. It actually says, I'll get to it. It actually says, like, wives, don't, like, hold out. And same thing for men. Like, men, like, don't hold out on your wife. So it actually says, have sex. Okay? So again, the Bible is very, very clear. And God actually is the one who actually commands us. That's actually one of the first commands. He says, go and multiply, right? He says, go and have sex. Did you have a question before we move on?
I guess I don't know. I never got a like straight answer, but like, so when Adam and Eve were in the garden, like when he said multiply, he was telling them to have sex in the garden.
Oh, yeah. No, why not?
Wait, did he tell them to have that before they were in? They left?
I
What
believe so.
was after?
Oh, I have to check that. That's very interesting.
Oh,
But-
Yeah.
But they have sex in paradise.
Of course, because it's not a dirty thing.
Oh, yeah, so what made it dirty?
Sin.
Yeah. Yeah,
Movies.
sense. All right, we'll go into that. All right.
Talk about it. Why can't we in our friendships?
All right, let's continue on. This is the last view. Shayna?
Is sex for self-fulfillment? Today, a third view is also prominent. While the first view sees sex as an unavoidable drive and the second as a necessary evil, this last view sees sex as a critical form of self-expression, a way to be yourself and find yourself. In this view, sex is primarily for an individual's fulfillment and self-realization, however he or she wishes to pursue.
Okay, so the idea is, hey, if I want to have sex with whoever I want for my happiness, who are you to tell me that I shouldn't? Okay, so again, this is the whole modern approach that most of us bought into, which is the greatest thing is our own personal freedom, volition. And we should have the greatest fulfillment, happiness would be me doing whatever my heart wants. And so of course, sex would be the same thing. So if I want to have sex with this person and that person and this person, then I'm going to be fulfilled if I do it. So why should I? Why shouldn't I do more? I feel good about it. And again, this is what you see in movies as well, right? It's like, I don't love her or him anymore. I don't feel it anymore. But this person, I'm gonna feel a lot of, I feel so much. So it's unfair for me to, again, the idea is if I feel it, it's not good for her, it's not good for me, it's not good for him. It's for everyone's happiness. So sex is part of that. What do you guys think? Do you think you have some of this? Once again, talk about how you feel. Do you think you have some of this? Agree, disagree, go for it.
No, it was just like, oh, I see. Feel closer to someone instead of first, like, oh my god, are you sure? Like straight, like you're touching your pants, you think that you're gonna be closer to that person, like you're there. It's like you're not there up here. Like that, but then that's not you guys are.
Like, what do you think that they're trying to, like, you're trying to help the individual realize that you're that person that helps them find themselves?
Yeah, that's always.
Like, what do you mean?
Jeremy, if you could read for us.
Is sex, however, primarily a means of individual happiness and fulfillment? No. But that doesn't mean
So the
that
word is primarily.
primarily.
Mhm.
Primarily, it means of individual happiness and fulfillment? No. But that doesn't mean that sex is not about joy or that it is only about duty. The Christian teaching is that sex is primarily a way to know God and build. And if you use it for those things rather than for your own personal satisfaction, it will lead to greater fulfillment.
Right. So again, there will be obviously, I mean, there's a reason why people have sex, right? It's because there is a lot of happiness and fulfillment, but it's not only for that. Does that make sense? That's not the end goal. Okay. So it says here the two things we're going to go into a little bit more. How would you know God better by having sex? Actually. Okay. So I'm just going to be very brief, but the whole idea is marriage itself, right? As we've been talking about, right, should actually point you to know God better, right? That's what we're basing the whole Ephesians 5 is all about, right? This idea of man and woman is a representative of God and the church, or God and us, basically, right? So the better you have a marriage relationship, and obviously sex is involved with marriage, then better you're going to know God. How about building community? How could we build community through sex? Making babies, right? Yeah. And I just had a kid, right?
Yeah.
Literally just had a kid. And really, when I was single and even when I was married, I never thought of it as, oh yeah, we're having sex to have kids. I always thought of it as, of course I'm having sex for individual pleasure, or even pleasure with me and my wife. But it's so beautiful that a living human being could come out of it, and 2 becomes 3. It's amazing. All right, so let's go into a little bit more. Sonia?
Sex is for whole life self-giving. However, the sinful heart wants to use sex for selfish reasons, not self-giving, and therefore the Bible puts many rules around it to direct us to use it rightly. The Christian sex ethic can be summarized like this: sex is for use within marriage between man and woman.
Okay, so again, if we need to actually shift our thinking. It is really hard, because everything we watch, every people we've talked to most of our life have not said this. It says, go and have sex and have great sex for yourself only. Okay? But actually, the biblical view is, no, that is somewhat true in the sense that there is great fulfillment in sex. But the way Bible shows it is, we want you to have even better sex. We want you to be even more fulfilled. Not just that 10-minute or 20-minute or even an hour fulfillment, but much, much more meaningful than that. Okay? So hopefully now we're going to go into it a little bit deeper, and I'm going to give you, I think, is one of the best, most beautiful way to, so basically I'm going to give you the conclusion, which is we need to be careful about sex because sex is such a beautiful thing. And if you understand that sex is a gift, instead of thinking it as, oh, well, I want to do it, but pastor told me, or the Bible told me not to do it, like, that's just not going to work, okay? Instead, if I can give you a grand view of sex, then hopefully you'll be able to say, wow, this is something that I want to treasure. Okay? I don't know if some of you guys do this, but for me, like, for example, if I'm like having potluck or something like that, if there's like something specific food I want and I like, there's not a lot of it, it's like, I really want this, I usually save it till the end. Does that make sense? So the idea is if it's like easy and if it's not useful, then of course you're going to go and have sex and whatever. But if you think of it as something very precious, then of course you want to be restrictive about it. Okay, so that's where we're going at. Okay, and I'm going to give you how the Bible gives us that imagery. All right, Joseph.
First explicit mention of sex in the Bible is the passage Genesis 2:24. Male and female are to be united to become one flesh. In other words, the marriage is a union between two people so profound that the first a new single person. The word unite is to make a binding covenant or contract. This covenant brings every aspect of two persons' lives together. They essentially merge into a single legal, social, and economic unit. As much of their needs in love, they donate themselves wholly to the other.
Okay, does this kind of make sense? I don't know if you guys ever thought of it like that, but again, the whole idea is you become a one unit, and that's why some people joke around and say, "Oh, now you're losing all your freedom, and you're like you're like a getting handcuffed and going to jail kind of a thing." But if you think of it as you getting caught by the police and like they're dragging you, yeah, absolutely, it sounds like a horrible thing. But if you think of it as it's a gift that you're giving, you're actually giving up your independence for satisfying or to serve someone else, that it becomes actually a very beautiful thing. Does that make sense? All right.
If you're sticking to the whole marriage, it's like it's married what we're ultimately going to have with God, and isn't it? We're more in alignment with His plan for us when we are depending on Him and not just freely. Oh, I can do things on my own.
Right.
God,
Yeah. But again, because like our whole like everything outside of right now our discussion tells us otherwise, right? Like every advertisement we watch, every show that we watch tells us, no, it's all about freedom. Like you're gonna find true fulfillment in freedom. Not to say I don't think freedom is important, but that's not the end thing, right? And but yeah, if we understand, if we know our boundary within, yeah, we actually find real freedom when we find the right boundaries, right? So in life, I think this is what Tim Keller and both C.S. Lewis said this, but in life, our goal is not to be like free and do whatever we want, but actually find the right restrictions. Like if a fish wants to say, I don't like water, I want to be free, and goes to the land, then it's going to be miserable. Okay, like Little Mermaid, miserable. Okay? Okay? But again, if you find the right restriction, then you're actually going to flourish within that restriction as well. Okay, anyways, so continuing on, to call the marriage one flesh then means that sex is understood as both a sign of that personal legal union and a means to accomplish it. Okay, so it's a sign. So it's a sign that you guys are coming together, but it's also a means. We'll talk about how it means how it actually helps you to actually get together as well, to accomplish it. The Bible says, don't unite with someone physically unless you are willing to unite with the person emotionally, personally, socially, economically, and legally, right? Because again, the whole idea is you're becoming one together. So if you're not wanting to become one, okay, with everything, not just physical, again, you can't detach. Okay, actually, later on, you'll be able to a little bit better. But if you're not wanting to do everything together, then don't connect with them just by having sex. Don't become physically naked and vulnerable to the other person without becoming vulnerable in every other way, because you have given up your freedom and bound yourself in marriage. Okay? Paul actually goes as far to say, don't sleep with prostitutes, because don't you know that even if you sleep with a prostitute, because back then they had a lot of prostitution back then, and again, the whole idea like, it's just a physical act, it's not a big deal. But Paul actually says you become one flesh with a prostitute then. So again, he's saying when you have sex then, okay, it's an act of becoming one. And this is without any science or anything else, but Paul understood, and of course the Bible indicates, again, if you have sex, that's also a means to become this covenantal relationship, whether you like it or not. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let's continue on. This is really beautiful, by the way. Next two slides, I absolutely love it. I think it's really beautiful.
Then once you have given yourself in marriage, sex is a way of maintaining and deepening that union as the years go by. In the Old Testament, there were often covenant renewal ceremonies. When God entered into a covenant relationship with his people, he directed that periodically there be an opportunity to have them remember the terms of the covenant by first reading it together and then recommitting themselves to it.
Yeah, so you see this over and over, especially if you read Exodus, you see it over and over again throughout Deuteronomy, like the whole, like the Israelites coming out and God continuing to say, okay, are you sure you want to do this? This is our contract. It's like, read it, Moses, read all of it, and then it's like, are you going to take it? Right? So again, we see that this idea of like renewal ceremony. Why? Because we all have memory problems. Right? We always forget things that we should remember, right? And things we should forget, we remember them. So we have issue, right? So that's why God. So if you think of sex also as covenant renewal ceremony, again, then it becomes really beautiful. And that's where we're going next.
It is the same with the marriage covenant. When you get married, you make a solemn covenant with your spouse. The Bible calls your spouse your covenant partner. That day is a great day, and your hearts are full. But as time goes on, there is a need to rekindle the heart and renew the commitment. Sex between a husband and wife is the unique way to do that.
Okay, does that make sense? So again, the idea is because you are married, because you decided, when you get married, you do a vow, right? So you're basically saying, I promise that I will be with this person until the rest of my life. What are you doing? You're signing a covenant, right? So you're basically saying, within this covenant, I'm giving everything over, including sex as well. But also it's saying sex is a way for you to remember once again your covenant. Does that make sense? All right. Continuing on.
So, according to the Bible, a covenant is necessary for sex. It creates a place of security for vulnerability and intimacy. But though a marriage covenant is necessary for sex, sex is also necessary for the maintenance of the covenant. It is your covenant renewal service.
Okay.
Whoa.
Does that make sense? So again, every time you are having sex, you are reminded once again, oh yeah, this is the covenant that I have made, that I am giving myself to this person. So nowadays, me and Grace, especially me, I go, okay, covenant renewal. So instead of, all right, this is our key word.
Wow.
Okay. I hope you guys adopt that too. I think it's really beautiful. Again, if you think of it, yeah, CRC. It could be a really beautiful thing. You're basically saying, hey, I want to commit myself to you again. I want to renew that. How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
Okay? So I hope you guys did that. Commitment apparatus.
The Bible does not counsel sexual abstinence before marriage because it has such a low view of sex. But because it has such a lofty view, the biblical view implies that sex outside of marriage is not just morally wrong, but also personally harmful. The sex is designed to be part of making a covenant and experiencing that covenant's renewal. So we should think of sex as an emotional commitment apparatus.
Okay. So again, and it makes sense. And science actually backs this up, right? When you have sex with somebody, what happens? There's emotional attachments, there's spiritual attachment and things like that. Okay, keep going. Continuing on.
Sex is the method that God invented to do whole life entrustment and self-giving. It shouldn't surprise us that sex makes us feel deeply connected to the other person, even when used wrongly. In the midst of sexual passion, you naturally want to say extravagant things such as, I'll always love you. You may find yourself very quickly feeling marriage like ties, thus it makes breaking up vastly harder than it should be. You're trapped.
Yeah.
Feel trapped.
Okay. Right? And you guys, I'm sure maybe some of you guys have been in a situation like that, unfortunately, if some of you guys have been there. Or you have friends who are in a relationship currently, or they have dragged out a relationship longer than they should, even though they even knew that they were in a toxic relationship. Why? Because they had sex, they got intimate. Because of that, they couldn't just cut that tie as easily as they wanted. Again, science supports this all over the place. Okay? They basically say, the more you have sex, the more, again, the idea is you become one. You're becoming glued together. Okay. Next one. Shayna? Yeah.
Therefore, if you have sex outside marriage, you will have to steel yourself against sex power to soften your heart toward another person and make you more trusting. The problem is that eventually, sex will lose its covenant-making power for you. Ironically, then, sex outside of marriage makes you less comfortable
makes you less able to commit and trust another person.
Wow. So if you understand this is really, really beautiful. So again, if you think of it as if sex is a way, God, again, sex is something within a marriage. So therefore, the sexual act itself, it glues us together. Okay, so if God invented sex, then that means if you have sex outside of marriage, you're trying not to be glued together, right? Most of the time you have sex because you just want to have the good physical pleasure, but a lot of times you don't want to stay with that person. Then you're going against what sex was made for. But the problem is, the more you have sex outside of marriage then, the more your stickiness, that power, actually loosens its power. So think of it as like a adhesive or like a Velcro, or think of it as glue, right? What happens if you keep like doing Velcro and ripping it off and putting it back? What happens? It starts to lose its adhesiveness. So what happens is, even though you do get married and you want to be committed to this one person, the thing is, previously, you had sex, but you were thinking, oh, I don't want to be emotionally attached. So that part of you had to kind of shut down. So what happens when you get into marriage? Then that part of you, it's not there. So sex just became just the physical thing for you, because that's how you continue to, that's what you used it for. Does that make sense? So when you come into marriage, that's why it says ironically, then you lose intimacy. Okay? So again, that's why you have to be very, very careful, because if you use this tool in a wrong way, or if you try to stick to someone that you're not wanting to stick to, then again, you could see how this tool can be broken. And when you actually want to have intimacy and great relationship with your spouse one day, you're not going to be able to do that. Or, of course, things are possible with God, but it's going to be very difficult. There's going to be a lot of consequences for that. Okay. Oh, sorry. So the concept is, and that's why we said the idea is the reason why we have so many restrictions and these kind of things is not because it's such a low thing, it's just a taboo thing, but because it's such a beautiful gift that God has given to us. So again, if you think of sex as it's a beautiful gift for me to give to my spouse, and we can become intimately close to, then again, that becomes something really, really beautiful. And within that, you can have, again, great, great relationship and great sex in that sense. All right. That's it for today, unless you guys have any questions for me. And the next week, we'll have part 2 of this. Okay, there will be a part 2. I know it's kind of like cutting it a little short. Okay, any questions or clarifications I can make before you guys go into your groups?
Joseph, any questions?
Well, I'll have to ask him first.
I have a semi-question.
Yeah.
So at the beginning, the question is, just church kind of dirty, or what was it? Restrictive, and are we comfortable? Things like that. Do you think the Bible has answers to those questions?
Or like how it should be.
Yeah.
Of like the standard.
Yeah.
No, I think it perfectly describes our situation, which is sex is a beautiful gift, and yet because of sin, it has tarnished it so much. And so I do think there is a level of discomfort that we do have, just because it's been abused in so many ways. And so a lot of us, I think when we think of sex, we don't think of it in the most positive sense. But yeah, the Bible is so positive about sex as well, So I do think we should be totally comfortable, and yet there is reasons why we're not comfortable, because sin has ruined sex for us. But when we get to heaven, it's going to be a great thing. I hope we'll be able to talk about sex just like, hey, I had sex with my wife yesterday, and it was great. Kind of like I had,
So do you think, according to that theory, that a healthy Christian would be a 10?
Uh,
100% of the time.
yeah, I think it is hard.
I think it depends
Just
on the
because
I don't think it's
just because there is so much, yeah, I think because of the sin aspect.
Some people like to be more private than others.
Yeah.
They can still be a healthy Christian.
It's American culture.
So I don't think our goal is necessarily we have to be comfortable with talking about sex. I don't think that's our goal. But I do think our goal needs to be we need to have a very healthy or biblical view of sex, which is it's a gift. It's a beautiful gift. And so if you're leaning on this way where it's like it just means nothing and it's physically just like whatever, then I do think we need to have a better view of sex.
And then if we want to have a better view, and we don't necessarily want to be a 10, does that mean that the church should continue to restrict?
I think it depends on how you're using the word restrictive. I use them more in the sense that like Bible is restrictive, like has bodyguards around sex. But I don't know what you mean by restrictive. Restrictive meaning like they don't talk about it at all, like that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I do think as a church, and I'm not just saying pastors. I'm actually saying the whole Christian. We're all church here. We should all be more. It starts with us too. Like we have to be more comfortable, but also have a good view of what sex is as well. I think it's easy for us again because we live in a world where sex is just a physical thing. It has nothing. Yeah. So I think we need to continue to hold on to it, and we need to be okay sharing these kind of things with each other as well. Yeah. All right.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say